Hello and welcome to the Mellow Dress sewing tutorial. I asked you guys on Instagram if you would like a more professional sewing tutorial, which is like teacher to student vibes, or if you'd like a more casual tutorial, like friend to friend vibes, and an overwhelming amount of you said friend to friend. So this is going to be a very casual tutorial. I'm just going to take you step by step through the Mellow Dress sewing instructions and show you how to do everything. If you want to purchase the Mellow Dress sewing pattern, I'll have it linked below, which will take you to my website where you can purchase it. And once you purchase the Mellow Dress, it'll have all the instructions and details of everything you need and fabric requirements and everything like that. So make sure to purchase the Mellow Dress, and yeah, let's get into sewing it. I have chosen this linen gingham that I'm going to use for this tutorial. All my pieces cut out and my bias. We're going to start with the bias binding and get that made up. Okay, we're going to do one strip of bias binding at a time. I've just got my other ones here, and we're going to have the wrong side facing up. Mine is linen, so there's obviously really no right or wrong side, but if you do have a right or wrong side, just make sure the wrong side is facing up. And we're going to fold it lengthways like this, and we're going to leave about 1/4 of an inch to 6 millimeters at the top here. Press it in place. So this is what your bias should look like, that little 1/4 of an inch gap at the top. After we've done that, we're going to actually open it back up, and you'll see the crease line there. And what we're going to do is we're going to fold this bottom edge, the smaller edge, up to the crease line and then press in place. This is what your bias should look like now. And what you're going to do is fold the top now down to that original crease line we did and press in place. So this is what your bias should look like now. Both the edges have been folded into the center here. And the next step is to just simply fold the bottom edge up in the original crease line, and you'll see that it is a little bit shorter, and that's what we want. So that's what we want it to look like, and we're just going to press that in place. And that is one strip of bias binding done. So we're just going to repeat those steps on the other pieces of bias binding. So here are my 3 strips of bias. I will say that the pattern does call for you to cut out 4. I've only cut out 3 and made 3 because these are each a little bit longer than what the pattern has suggested. So they're a bit bigger, and I think I can get away with only using 3. These are my pattern pieces here. The back 2 are here, and then the front is underneath. And I'm just gonna stay stitch close to the edge around the neckline and armholes, just so they don't stretch out while sewing. So here is my front piece stay stitching. It's pretty close to the edge. So yes, I've just done around the neckline and armholes. Same for the back as well. Stay stitch around the necklines and armholes again. Now we are going to overlock or finish the center back seam allowance. You can finish it with a zigzag stitch if you like. I'm going to overlock mine, and we're just going to do them individually. So this side I'll do first, and then this side I'll do next. I've now overlocked both these center back edges. So both those edges have been overlocked all the way to the bottom. We're going to pin these together right sides. So I'm going to flip this one on top of this one, right sides together, and pin and sew the center back. So like I said, we're going to sew this center back seam with a narrow zigzag stitch. These are the settings on my sewing machine. It might be a little bit different to yours, so make sure to test it. But my tension is at a 1 and my stitch is obviously a zigzag and it's just in the middle. I'll show you what it looks like after. And my length is about 2.5. But yeah, we're just going to sew this center back seam. And that is my zigzag stitch. So yeah, I've just done that all along the center back. And now what we're going to do is we're going to clip into the curve of this center back, and it's just going to sit a lot better when it's on the body if it's clipped. If you have a lighter fabric, you might be able to get away with not clipping at all because it'll drape pretty well, but with a linen I would definitely clip. I'm going to not really clip the hem because it's quite straight from about here down. It's mostly just like the mid back where it curves and also the shoulder blades. So that is what this looks like. You can see I've clipped close to the stitching but not through. So yeah, that's what that looks like. We're gonna press the seam allowance open. This is my back pattern piece laying with the right side up, and I'm gonna get my front pattern piece and I'm gonna place it right side down so the right sides will be touching. So this is my front piece, and what I'm gonna do is simply pin the side seams together. Both side seams have been pinned, and what we're going to do is we're going to sew those with the narrow zigzag stitch. Okay, so we have just pressed the side seams towards the center back on both sides. That's now done. And what we're going to move on to next is sewing the wearer's right shoulder seams together. So which is this side, the one with the longer edge to go up here. And first thing we're going to do is overlock these edges individually. So we have just finished overlocking these individually. You see the front's done individually and the back as well. And what we're going to do is pin these together and then sew them with 1/2 inch seam allowance. So that is that done, and we're just going to press this open now, like that. We have now pressed that, so that is the right shoulder done. And we're just going to move on to the left shoulder for a second. So this is the side that's going to have the buttons on it, and I've already marked it. But on the back piece, you want to draw your seam allowance, which is 1/2 inch, which you can see lightly there I've drawn across, and you're just going to cut it off. That's all you have to do, is just cut the seam allowance off the back. This is what it should look like now. It should be sitting quite flat, and on this side obviously sewn together. The next step is to grab our bias binding that we made, and we're going to attach it to the armhole. This is the wrong side of my garment, And I'm going to start with the wearer's right armhole first, which is the complete one. So we're going to attach our bias binding by unfolding it, and we're going to pin the right side of the shorter edge to the wrong side of the garment. So this is the right side of the shorter edge. We are going to just flip it around quickly, unfold it again, and we're going to pin that down onto the garment. You can see I have now pinned that all the way around the wearer's right armhole, and I've left tails close to the side seam. I've also left a gap. See these two yellow pins? That's where I'm not going to sew just yet. So I'm going to start at this pin, I'm going to go all the way around and then stop at this pin. So there's going to be a little gap there. I'm going to sew right on that little crease just there. So this is what my right armhole looks like now, and I have left my gap like I said I would. So I'm just going to remove those pins, and what we're going to do is we're going to attach these two ends on a diagonal seam. We're going to mark a point on each of these tails where they're going to join. I'm going to use the side seam as my marker point. So all I'm going to do is start with one tail, and I'm going to line it up where it would be sewn, and then my side seam is just there. So I'm going to put my pin where the side seam is. I'm just going to put it in like that, and then I'm going to take it out only in my bias binding. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the other tail. I'm going to lay it flat, bring it to the side seam, and then mark the side seam again, pull it in, and then take it out. I've got my two markers here, and all we're going to do is put the bias binding right sides together, which is the underside, so this side. We're going to put these right sides together at a 90 degrees angle, making sure that these marker points are on top of each other. I like to take out my pin, and because I can still see the hole, I will put this pin into this marker's hole. So I know that that lines up exactly. So like that, it is not 90 degrees. So all we're going to do is spin this around. So the marker is now through both tails. Spin it around. And it should be like that now. And all you want to do is open up the bias binding completely so it's flat. Pin it up. Pin it. So that is what it looks like. The marker is obviously the yellow pin, and the bias binding is 90 degrees. They are laid out flat. They do curl up, so just make sure they're flat when you're sewing. All we're going to do is sew from this corner to this corner, going through the marker point. So straight through on a diagonal. So this is what it now looks like. Just gonna take out these pins. So that's what it looks like. And before we trim this excess off, we're going to just check that it is now the same circumference as the armhole just by laying it flat against the armhole, and you can see there's no gaps there, so it's going to fit perfectly. It's now the same circumference as the armhole circumference. So we can cut these tails off. I like to cut mine pretty close, and you can give this an iron and press that open. And then we're going to pin this in place. So we're now going to sew this gap closed just by doing exactly what we did before, sew along the crease. You can also cut off any excess like this little tail that's hanging out here, you don't need it. All we're going to do is sew that gap closed. So that is what that looks like now. So I'm just going to turn my garment so that the right side is facing out. Then you're going to work on folding the bias binding around the raw edge of the armhole. Use the creases in the bias binding to assist you. All raw edges should be concealed, and the fold on the garment's right side should just cover the stitch line underneath. Press and pin the bias binding in place. Sew the bias binding in place by carefully stitching close to the folded edge on the right side of the garment. Press once complete. This is what your bias should now look like. And this is what the wrong side should look like. Right side and wrong side. And then we're going to move on to doing the neckline and other armhole. I have just turned my garment to the wrong side facing out, and I'm just going to attach my bias binding to the neckline and the wearer's left armhole by using the same steps as I did before, by unfolding the bias and pinning the right side of the shorter edge to the wrong side of the fabric. And I'm going to make sure to leave tails at this open edge here on the shoulder. This is the wearer's left armhole. I've left tails at the shoulder opening up here, and I've just pinned it all the way around onto the back as well, and then left tails at the back shoulder as well. So now the neckline and left shoulder are ready to be sewn. They're just going to be sewn in that little crease like we did before on the right armhole, and we're just going to sew all the way around the neckline and all the way around the left shoulder. That is what the neckline and armhole look like now. And all we're going to do is flip this to the right side facing out, and then we're going to repeat the steps we did previously and flip the bias onto the right side and stitch it in place. The next step is just to trim these excess tails off, the front and back. So that's the front done. And that's the back done. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to use my leftover bias binding, and I'm going to do the exact same methods I did on the neckline and armholes and attach it to these shoulder seams individually. So one for the front and one for the back. I have just turned my garment to the wrong side out, and now I'm going to attach my bias binding by unfolding and placing the right side of the shorter edge to the wrong side of the garment. And I'm just going to do the same thing to the back. And now we're going to sew in that crease line on the back and also on the crease line on the front. So this is my front shoulder on the, and I'm just going to trim these tails a bit. And we're just going to trim these to reduce some bulk and fold them in and then close it all up so it's nice and concealed. So all you want to do is, actually I'm going to trim these a little bit more. So all you want to do is cut some little triangles out here. It's just going to help reduce some bulk. So that's what mine looks like. I'm just going to do that on the other side. So that's what it looks like now. All we're going to do is fold in these ends, and you can stitch these in place if you need to or want to, just so it's a little bit more secure. Fold down, pin, fold in these edges, and fold down the top edge. We're just going to sew straight across, and you'll do the exact same to the back. This is what it looks like. I have sewn down the edges here just because on the back I cut a little bit too close to the edge here, and you can see it fraying, so I just sewed across there and thought I might as well do all the other edges as well. So that's why I've done it. It's not necessary, but I did it. And yeah, so that's what that will look like. Next we're going to sew buttons onto our wearer's left shoulder. So I have got myself thread, a needle, a decent amount of thread too, because you don't want to run out. And I'm just going to start with the center button and I'm going to back stitch. And then I'm going to grab my button, thread it through one of the holes, back through the other hole. When that's secure enough for you, all you're going to do is go up one more time, but not through the button. You're going to come out between the button like that. And then we're going to wrap the button a few times to create a shank. And then we're going to go back, down, and out. Then we're going to sew a back stitch. Tie a knot. And that is one button done. So we're just going to sew the other two on. So that's what that should look like now. Now we're going to sew the thread chains on the back and they're going to line up with the buttons like that. So I've just threaded my needle. It has 4 threads there. So I've threaded through 2 and then I've folded it over and tied it at the end with a knot. And we're going to start sewing the thread chains. I'm going to start on the wrong side of the garment and I'm going to insert the needle where I'm going to position the thread chain. So I'm starting with my middle thread chain and I'm going to pull it through to the right side of the garment. Then I'm going to reinsert the needle in the same spot or pretty close to the same spot that I just pulled through. So I'm going to pull through, but I'm going to leave a loop on the right side. Going to insert my needle again to the right side and I'm going to pull it through. So I've just pulled my needle through to the right side, keeping the loop. And now all I'm going to do is hold the loop with 2 fingers open like this and my other hand with the thread with the needle on the end like this. And I'm going to pinch that thread and pull it through the loop and pulling it tight all the way to the bottom. So I've created a knot at the base and I've created a new loop. So we're going to do that again. So pinch this thread and pull it through the loop and then pull tight. And just keep going. And when you start to build up a bit of that chain, you can hold on to the chain so it's a bit more secure. And you want this thread chain to be long enough to go around your front button. So it's not long enough yet because it needs to go around and back to its original spot. And that is a pretty good size. So all I'm going to do is, with my loop and my needle and thread, I'm going to put the needle through the loop and pull tight, and that's going to lock it in place. And then I'm going to reinsert my needle at the base, pull tight, and then I'm going to sew a back stitch on the wrong side of the fabric to keep it in place. That is my first thread chain. And this is what your wearer's left shoulder should look like. Leave your dress to hang for 12 to 24 hours before hemming. This allows the fabric to relax and fall naturally. After letting it hang, you may find that the hem has become uneven. This is very normal with bias cut fabric. Even up the hem by trimming. So it's the next day and my Mellow dress has been hanging for about 12-ish hours, a little bit more, and I haven't noticed much of it drop, and if it has, it's pretty even. I just tried it on and I'm not gonna trim it up because it's still pretty even. I'm gonna hem mine as is. So I've just got my ironing board here. So I've got my dress inside out, and I'm gonna start at the center back, and I'm simply just gonna fold the hem up about 5 millimeters and press it in place. And we're back to the center back. So that's what it looks like so far. And we're just going to do the exact same thing. We're going to fold it again, 5 millimeters to the wrong side of the fabric. And we're back to the center back again. And that's what it looks like. And we're just going to stitch that in place now, pretty close to the fold line. And this is what your hem should look like. This is the right side and this is the wrong side.